Look, this time each week we hear from the former Queensland Premier Campbell Newman, not necessarily about Queensland issues. We'll be looking at things local, national and international. But before we do, Queensland announced, as you know, that its borders would be entirely shut. Now, that began last Saturday, which has disturbed a lot of people who are texting me. This was after Queensland's Chief Health Officer, the unelected Dr Jeanette Young, declared New South Wales and the ACT hotspots. Hotspots? I suppose 17 cases in New South Wales and none in the ACT make them hotspots. Then we had a scenario where the state government spooked all Queenslanders because one lady in Ipswich tested positive. Can someone give us a break? The second border closure is causing massive losses and more dislocation for those in the building, tourism and restaurant industries. The Master Builders Chief Executive, Grant Galvin, said the building industry is, quote, reeling from the lack of detail and that members who worked across the border are suffering. Mr Galvin said, we've got builders with teams from Queensland who are working on critical infrastructure projects in regional New South Wales, and we're now not sure what impact it will have on travelling team members and subbies. Diane Tipping from the Export Council of Australia has said it's devastating for the tourism industry for any kind of shutdown, whether it be international or domestic, and Queensland relies a great deal on tourism. These draconian lockdowns and border closures are affecting the mental health of our fellow Australians. The ultimate giveaway? Try Scott Morrison's additional funding for mental health services last week. During the announcement, the Prime Minister said suicide prevention was one of his highest priorities. Prime Minister, if you want to avoid suicides, stop sending hard-working Australians broke and open up the damn country. But instead, you impose this wretched national cabinet on the country. As Professor Ross Fitzgerald wrote today, quote, in any cabinet worthy of the name, decisions are what the cabinet chairperson decides. They are, and they're binding on all members. But despite the existence of the so-called national cabinet, on border closures and school openings, each state has done exactly what it pleased, regardless of the Prime Minister's preference. In short, government is sending every business broke, especially when you've got rogue premiers doing what they like, closing borders and imposing curfews. Let's get some sense from Campbell Newman, the former Queensland Premier. Campbell, your views on a national cabinet?
Well, as you said, Alan, a cabinet is meant to be an organisation or a group that come together behind closed doors, make a decision and then stick to it and actually speak with one voice. And that is clearly not happening. We've had multiple voices from multiple premiers and first ministers around the nation. And what has particularly disturbed me, and there's been a bit about it in the Australian Today and commentary on Sky this afternoon, is that the Prime Minister thinks he doesn't actually have to stand up and call these things out. This is one particular country. This is a nation, Australia. It's a federation. And I know the Prime Minister wants to try and get through this and have good relationships. But when things have to be called out, you know what, the boss has got to call them out. And last week, I don't know why, for example, after many months of saying that the borders should be open, he then pulled out of the action, the High Court action, to appease the WA, I think, Liberal Party, and certainly maintain some sort of facade of a good relationship with the WA Premier. It's not helping Australia, it's hindering Australia.
Campbell, the Prime Minister, as I understand it, told the federal executive of the Liberal Party at the weekend that they shouldn't be attacking Daniel Andrews. He's doing his best.
Well, look, I just couldn't disagree more furiously with that if that's what really happened. Because it's like this. We saw the true colours of Daniel Andrews in the last week and a half, where when he had his back against the wall, what did he do? He threw a hand grenade back at the coalition federally about the nursing homes. And then, of course, we've seen the pile-on from federal Labor. Now, that just shows you that this guy, who, by the way, used to, back when he was opposition leader, as I recall, he said that people like Baillieu and Premier Baillieu and Napthine, I haven't got this right, but I'm pretty sure this is correct. He said that they had blood on their hands over the handling or mishandling of the ambulance service in Victoria.
That's correct.
So, yeah, that was pretty significant. That was pretty over the top language. Now, he should quite rightfully be criticised for the mishandling of the pandemic in Victoria by his government. And that is quite appropriate for him to be called out on that.
Well, the Prime Minister says this National Cabinet is going to be a permanent fixture in our political system. What do you make of that?
Well, it used to be called COAG, and I'd said some critical things about that when I was involved in the past because it didn't get much done. I'm not sure that it's achieving too much at the moment in terms of a universal or a unanimous approach on the way that we deal with these things. I mean, what we really need to see from these people right now is a plan to get Australia's economy going. We've seen some disturbing stats starting to come out about the increase in mental health problems and suicides. That was always predicted.
Well, we go to mental health. Hang on, Campbell. We'll go to mental health. I just want to come to you on that point about getting us out of this mess. Now, you have spoken before about this appalling circumstance confronting Flight Centre. Just to amplify those points.
Well, Screw Turner, who is one of Australia's great entrepreneurs based in Queensland, who's built a global business with those Flight Centre sort of retail outlets on high streets, giving us great airfares and travel bargains. Well, that organisation has obviously been crippled, and he wrote a piece about a week or so ago in the Weekend Courier Mail talking about the need for a plan, about the need for more than just a lockdown and sort of platitudes about keeping us safe, about a real plan to get the economy going, to restart businesses. And I continue to be amazed, Alan, at the way that the mainstream media don't really want to get into this.
I agree. No, that's I agree.
Business is being crippled. Livelihoods are being smashed. The public sector hasn't been hurt at all. No. It's easy for people in the public sector and universities and the ABC to pontificate about keeping Australians safe. But there are a whole lot of other Australians who aren't safe, aren't feeling well, because they've got the sickening prospect of decades of work being smashed.
Well, let me just for the benefit of our viewers amplify that point that Campbell's made, because before coronavirus, Flight Centre operated in 24 countries. It had annual sales of about 24 billion. It had more than 2,200 shops and office locations, which were filled by 22,000 full-time employees. Campbell makes the point. The headquarters were in South Bank in Brisbane, 1,800 people working there. Phenomenal story for business in Queensland. 4 months after the coronavirus restrictions enforced by the government, Flight Centre have only 6,000 people worldwide, not 22,000. They now have 600 people at the headquarters at South Bank, not 1,800. There are less than 1,000 locations of Flight Centre. Before there were 2,200. And now they say they're at about 10% of previous sales and losing hundreds of millions a year. Campbell, this is economic suicide imposed by government.
It is. And, just getting back to how do we deal with coronavirus and how do we deal with the economy? Well, what has happened, Alan, is that our leaders have moved without really acknowledging this from a flatten the curve strategy to eliminate this bug somehow, which may not be possible without that important vaccine. So, I'm all for trying to flatten the curve, but trying to actually eliminate the thing will absolutely flatten the Australian economy like a pancake.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to see our political leaders, particularly the Prime Minister, be more forthright about the need to deal with this. He cannot keep letting certain premiers, and there's more than one, more than just Daniel Andrews, off the hook.
Absolutely.
They need to have a plan. Open the Parliament and their parliaments, and if National Cabinet is actually to achieve something, let's see the economic plan for recovery.
But so you just
That's the most important work.
You made the point before. I mean, government have basically admitted that they're sending people to the brink. Last week, I said earlier, we had Scott Morrison announce more funding for mental health services, Headspace, Lifeline, Beyond Blue and so on. So here they are, Morrison, Palaszczuk, Berejiklian and Andrews saying, I'm sorry we're sending you broke. I'm sorry we're shutting down the border. Sorry we're destroying your livelihood, but here's a mental health service which you can visit to get help. I mean, this is the end of the road.
It's our truck. It's our truck that's knocking you over, but here's a Band-Aid.
Yeah.
It's quite perverse, Alan. It really is.
It is astonishing.
And it needs and they need to actually do some heavy lifting.
Oh, it's
rather
terrible.
Than just shut borders and tell us what we can't do.
Yeah. Well, just one thing before you go. Queensland's taken out the title of the bankruptcy capital of Australia. This is grim stuff.
It is really grim. I mean, when you've got those sort of statistics, people
1,400 businesses, 1,400.
1,400, Alan. And, the sad thing is that at the moment we've got a Premier who continues to ratchet up in the popularity stakes. And look, here's my point this evening, I suppose, particularly. Real leadership is about telling people, confronting truths, not giving them comforting lies, not soft-soaping them. It's actually confronting the issues and taking people on a journey. That's what great wartime leaders do, or have done in the past. And we need to see that sort of leadership from our leaders, Alan. That's what I expect of them.
But, I mean, if we've got just a final thing, in your own state, there's an election coming up. Labor government vandalising the economy. How will a Liberal National Party do any better? Where are they? I mean, the Liberal National Party Treasury spokesman, Tim Mander, does he know anything about economics?
Well, I'd put it like this in terms of the politics of the situation. They have many issues they could go after the government on in relation to COVID-19.
Yeah.
The inconsistencies between these rules. You talked about Jeanette Young earlier on.
Yeah.
Well, Jeanette Young was on one of the TV stations this evening being sort of lauded for her amazing leadership. Well, Dr Young has made some real mistakes and bad calls during this whole thing. But really, at the end of the day, whether we get through this well or not in Queensland isn't actually Dr Young's sort of claim to fame. That's not her victory. It's actually Palaszczuk's. Palaszczuk is the one who's responsible. So if we get through this with no cases but a completely decimated economy, that's Premier Palaszczuk's fault.
Campbell, I'll ask you...
Because at the end of the day, she's got to take advice.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I'll ask you...
Sorry.
I'll ask you a dumb question before we go. You're a student of politics. Did you see Dr Jeanette Young's name on any ballot paper at the last election?
No, I didn't. But I'm confused that someone seems to be putting her up for. We don't have knighthoods anyway, Alan. And I don't mean to make light of the important work that she and her team are doing. But I can tell you now, she gave me advice when I was Premier, and on occasions I would have taken it, and on other occasions I would have dismissed it. And there have been many occasions during this pandemic, if I'd been in the chair, I can tell you now that I've said, thank you, Dr Young. Next advisor in, please. Let's have another viewpoint on that. I mean, banning 4 plane-over flights on Anzac Day, but permitting a funeral to happen in Mackay, waving through a supposed consular official who turned out to be a security person to fly into the Sunshine Coast on a commercial flight and then drive to Toowoomba. These are things that have happened through Dr Young and her team.
Absolutely.
And though they sit at the Premier's front door.
Great stuff, Campbell. Good to talk to you. You made a very, very good point. It's advice.
Thanks, Alan.
It's advice. It seems to me, lemming-like, they just accept the advice. They're followers, not leaders. Good to talk to you.